A middle-aged man with silver at his temples packed a little broom and rags into a large bag, filled an empty 5-litre bottle with tap water, and headed towards the door. In the hallway, a boy sat on a banquette. The child's flushed cheeks and sniffling nose were not left unnoticed by the man, and he asked,
"Tucker, wouldn't you rather stay home? There's nothing wrong with it. You can sit and watch cartoons. I'll be back quickly. If you don't want to be alone, I can ask Leslie to stay with you, or call Hailey to look after you."
A blush spread across the boy's cheeks, a usual sign of his excitement, and he firmly replied, "No, I must go to my mum." The boy grabbed the cane by the door, stood up from the banquette, and just as he was opening the door, turned to his father, warning in a stern tone, "And don't let Leslie come to my mother's. She doesn't belong there." The man frowned. Leslie had already texted him that she was waiting in the parking lot nearby. This was the last thing he needed. Now he would have to explain things to her. Limping slightly and leaning on a cane, the boy headed for the elevator. He pressed the button and asked, "Dad, can we go to the market to buy some seedlings? I want to get fresh flowers for Mum."
"Of course, son. We'll definitely stop by,"
his father responded. A door slammed behind them, and they were joined by a neighbour. The woman, dressed in a light summer sundress, greeted them and inquired, "Are you heading to Doreen's? That's right, it's her birthday today, isn't it?" The man nodded.
"Yes, Hailey, we're heading to Doreen's. We'll pick up some flowers and go straight there. We want to be back before the city gets too hot."
"Nate," the woman proposed, "if you'd like, you can leave Tucker with me. I also wanted to visit Doreen, but a little later." The boy shook his head dejectedly, and, accepting his point of view, the woman did not insist on her own. She gently stroked Tucker's head, looked at his father, and was about to speak when the elevator doors opened. Lastly, in line with the rules, the boy entered the elevator. In the confined elevator space, the conversation faded like a fire deprived of oxygen. Once outside, under the already scorching summer sun, everyone silently went their separate ways. Hailey headed towards the supermarket on the ground floor, while her neighbours made their way to the parking lot. Near the car, where Nate and Tucker were headed, a delicate young woman stood wearing light, wide trousers, a baggy t-shirt, and a baseball cap adorned with the logo of a well-known rock band. Beside the car was a box of plants. The man opened the car, but the boy didn't rush to get in. Instead, he grabbed his father's hand and spoke loudly enough for the woman to hear. "I'm not going with her to see Mum. She should leave. I don't want to see her, and all her flowers can go with her. I'd rather pick flowers for my Mum," Tucker exclaimed.
"Tucker, how can you behave like this?"
The man tried to object.
"Leslie has prepared and made an effort, yet you're acting rudely. You're an adult. Think, maybe we can all go together."
The boy, leaning on his cane, with his head bowed low, repeated, "I won't go to see Mum with her. I'd rather take the bus. But you can do whatever you want." Tucker then turned to leave for the bus stop. Quickly reacting, Leslie called out, "Tucker, wait, don't go. Nate, Tucker is probably right. I shouldn't come with you. I'll leave the plants here, as I can't take them home across town. Do what you want with them. I have to go now. Tucker, I apologise if my presence offended you. Nate, call me when you're free." Leslie wanted to kiss the man, at least on one cheek, but noticing Tucker's stern look, she decided against showing her affection. Nate helped his son get into the back seat, then got behind the wheel, and they carefully exited the parking lot. The cityscape began to flicker outside the window. Despite the early hour, the streets were already bustling with cars. Many were seeking an escape from the city into nature. Near the plant market, at the city exit, Nate pulled over and offered, "Tucker, shall I buy the flowers myself? It might be hard for you to walk, right?" "No, I'll go," Tucker replied stubbornly. "I want to pick the flowers for my Mum myself." Slowly, Tucker walked along the rows of stalls, leaning on a stick. He looked a bit like an old man, except for his beautiful chestnut hair. Despite the numerous offers from vendors showcasing their flowers, the boy remained focused. Nate walked beside him, suppressing the urge to make suggestions. Eventually, Tucker stopped near an elderly woman. He greeted her and asked, "Excuse me, could you recommend some flowers that don't need frequent watering? They should be beautiful and blooming. They're for my mum, and I want her to like them." The florist started asking about the soil type on the plot, how often watering could be done, and what types of flowers the woman liked. Tucker lowered his head and didn't answer. Nate approached the elderly woman and whispered almost inaudibly, ensuring his son couldn't hear. "We need very hardy plants. We'll be planting them in a cemetery." The elderly woman, trying to hide her emotions, stopped asking questions and started suggesting options. Tucker picked out 5 pots and the seller carefully placed them in a cardboard box. Nate tried to pay, but his son was quicker. He took money from his pocket and handed it to the woman who was giving planting instructions. "When you plant, first moisten the hole well, then remove the plants from the pot and place them in the hole. Cover with soil, press down and water again." The man thanked the saleswoman, took the box and started walking slowly ahead. Tucker, with tears welling up in his eyes, followed his father. Soon, the man and the boy stood before the grave of the beloved woman and mother. A pretty young woman was looking at them from the picture. She had lived too briefly, and the unfairness of it all stung both Tucker and his father. The grave was still new, with the earth not yet fully settled, making it too early to think about a gravestone. However, the woman's final resting place was already enclosed by a beautiful wrought iron lattice where a wreath was attached. Overwhelmed with despair, the man sighed deeply. Tucker broke the silence, whispering, "Hello, Mother. I'm sorry it took me so long to come." The father and son, mourning their loss, planted flowers on the grave, stood in silence for a few minutes, and then slowly walked back to their car. Their spirits were low. Nate suggested stopping at a fast food joint, but Tucker declined, saying he wasn't in the mood for anything. In mid-August, Nate informed his son of an important decision he had made. "Tucker," he began, "we need help right now. You need supervision when I'm on a business trip. I don't want to keep troubling Cynthia. She has her own life, and my constant requests may make her uncomfortable. She's too polite to say anything about it. Luckily, we have another option. I've started a relationship with Leslie. I know you don't like her, but it's been decided. We're moving in together." The boy had probably intuitively realized this was coming a long time ago, but he still couldn't contain his displeasure. "You traitor!" he yelled, his cheeks flushed with intense emotion. "You've betrayed Mum. I don't want you to be with that Leslie. She's nasty and disgusting, just like green sticky snot. She's only interested in your apartment and your salary. I bet she'll try to send me to an orphanage." After these words, Tucker, a resilient little fighter who had bravely endured his mother's loss and numerous complicated surgeries, broke down in tears. The thought of being unwanted by his own father was too much for him. He had experienced too many hardships in the past year. Nate was taken aback. His son hadn't cried this loudly, even at his mother's funeral, and he didn't know how to comfort him. He sat down next to Tucker on the sofa, held his sobbing boy tightly, and fought back his own tears. Why was fate so cruel to them? They had a good family life, never argued, and enjoyed their time together. They even planned to get Tucker a dog for his 8th birthday. However, a tragic accident shattered everything. While Nate was away, his wife and son went to a ski base outside the city. His wife, Doreen, sent him beautiful photos to share their joy. But about an hour after receiving the last photo, their happiness was abruptly ended. A stranger called from his wife's number to inform him about a car accident. Only Nate's formidable driving let him carefully park the multi-ton vehicle on the curb without another car accident. The man spent several minutes pounding his hands on the steering wheel because the news he had just received
seemed deadly horrible. He half expected to wake up from this nightmare or receive a call from his wife, Doreen, reminding him to drive carefully. But the expected miracle never occurred. Doreen had died, and their son Tucker was severely injured. According to the doctor's cautious predictions, Tucker's recovery would be a lengthy process. On that dreadful December day, once he grasped the reality of the situation, Nate contacted his boss, explained the circumstances, and requested someone to pick up his cargo. He needed to return home as soon as possible to arrange the funeral and provide support for his injured son. Nate's parents had passed away, and Doreen herself had grown up in an orphanage. In those initial hours, their neighbour Hailey was the only one available to look after Tucker in the hospital. Upon hearing about Doreen's death from Nate, Hailey rushed to the hospital to see the child she had known since he was born. Tucker was deeply affected by the loss of his mother, because it was he who tried to persuade his mother not to leave him, but the woman died in his arms before the ambulance arrived. Hailey, a neighbour and close friend of dead Doreen, took a week off work to help her friend's family. It was she who, in the terrible days, filled with especially acute grief, ordered Nate not to give up because he had to take care of the child. It was almost impossible to do it alone. At that time, Nate faced a dilemma. If he continues to go for truck journeys, there will be no one to help Tucker with his rehabilitation, and if he stays with him, there will be no money to live on. Sometimes Nate struggled to recognize his own son. Tucker would become deeply introspective or overly anxious, immediately becoming upset if things didn't go as planned. The idea of a new marriage for the widower was suggested by Hailey, a neighbour who, one evening, 3 months after the tragedy, brought over some pies. Once she ensured that Tucker was in the other room wearing headphones, she initiated a serious conversation with Nate. "Don't immediately reject what I'm about to say. Just listen and consider my idea. I know you loved Doreen. It's impossible not to. I miss her too. She was my rock through every sorrow and joy, which makes it even harder. Let me be blunt. Doreen wouldn't want you struggling between work and caring for Tucker all by yourself. You can't do it all alone. So, I'll just say it now before I start crying. You should remarry, Nate. At least then you won't worry about your son as much. There will be food in the fridge, and the apartment will be clean." The man was stunned. "Hailey, what are you saying? I've just buried my wife. How can I bring another into my house? What will people think? How could I saddle my son with a stepmother? Besides, it would feel like betraying Doreen." Hailey stood up, signalling that she wasn't going to argue, and headed for the door. "Think about it, Nate. It could solve many problems. As for what others might say, why should you care?" Nate didn't view himself as naive, and understood that Hailey was subtly suggesting herself as a potential partner. However, he saw her as a sister figure due to their years of neighbourliness and her friendship with his wife. She was familiar and comforting. Despite her beauty and good rapport with Tucker, Nate never saw her in a romantic light. He valued her reliability and wisdom, but he correctly interpreted her hint and didn't make any moves. Nevertheless, Nate saw potential in the idea of providing Tucker with a stepmother. He had considered hiring a nanny, but stories of negligent caregivers deterred him. And then he met Leslie, and she, intuitively, seemed the most suitable to him. He first noticed her while picking up a new desk for Tucker. She was working in the warehouse that day, and her attentive and helpful nature left a good impression on him. The young woman only surprised him because she resembled Doreen. It wasn't very obvious, but their types were similar. Doreen's facial features were clear and sharp, albeit slightly more rounded. Leslie, in contrast, had a girlish angularity, but her face was gentle and softened, as if painted with watercolours. Nate thought
that if the stepmother reminded Tucker even a little of his mother, it might be easier for him to accept the stranger in their house. With no specific expectations, the man drove up to that very furniture store, and as if by order, she came out of it. As it turned out, Leslie remembered him, and when Nate asked if she would mind talking to him, she agreed. So, at the neighbour's suggestion, Nate began to build a new relationship with Leslie, even if it was not based on overwhelmingly romantic feelings. After they started dating, Tucker became prickly, like a hedgehog. A slight touch would make him curl up into a ball. Conversations with him became impossible. He would look askance and repeat his perspective, sometimes verbatim, sometimes with slight variations. Only 8 months had passed since Doreen's early death, yet Nate was already prepared for a new marriage. He recognised that his longing to remarry was not driven by emotion. Leslie was charming and gentle, and he liked her. However, he saw her less as a beloved wife and more as a responsible caretaker for Tucker and the household. This was admittedly selfish and not entirely fair to Leslie, but Nate tried to dismiss his guilt. After all, Leslie wasn't naive. She knew his situation and that he didn't love her as much as he had loved Doreen. The young woman turned out to be very pleasant in communication, a caring and attentive person. Despite Nate's pragmatic moves, she managed to alleviate the sharp pain he felt from losing his wife. Leslie attempted to bond with Tucker, but he neither dismissed her or responded rudely. He never called her by name, referring to her only as that woman or she. Tucker's contemptuous tone made it clear that he saw her as an enemy. However, the boy had never made such extreme statements until now. Nate suspected, even knew, that someone had influenced Tucker's perception of Leslie as a gold digger who, after marriage, would try to send him to an orphanage. He was certain that most likely Hailey was behind this. She frequently looked after Tucker when Nate was late from work. It seemed she wasn't just caring for Tucker, but also turning him against Leslie. Nate began to persuade his son. "Tucker, you must understand we have no other way out. Long-distance trips are now more profitable than driving around the city. I can't leave you alone. I'm afraid of losing you. It's important for me to have someone around who is always ready to help you. If you just spend more time with Leslie, you'll realise that she's a good person. Haven't you noticed that she looks like Mum in some ways?" The boy's anger bubbled over and he nearly shouted, "I have noticed. That's why I despise her even more. Why is she alive when Mum isn't? I hate her." Tucker sobbed so violently that he began to hiccup. Nate tried his best to soothe the upset child. He felt anger towards his neighbour himself and even fate, but he was determined not to abandon the idea of marrying Leslie. However, not only Tucker, but also Leslie's parents were opposed to this marriage. Understandably, they did not want their daughter to marry a widower raising a troubled child. "Why are you making things so hard for yourself?" the mother tried to appeal to her daughter's sense. "The child has problems and your Nate simply decided to shift them onto you. Mark my words, as soon as his son's health improves, you won't be needed. If you're lucky, it'll happen quickly and you'll still have time to build a life after the divorce. Why do you need a stranger's child? Even if you care for him, you'll still be an outsider, drawing the father's attention, and a wicked stepmother in his eyes. If you decide to have your own child, you'll be seen as a villain. Trust me, instances where children from a first marriage accept their step-parents are rare. And even then, most examples are from movies, where everything works out, but in real life it's usually different." Leslie's father was less articulate, but also objected to his daughter's marriage to Nate. "Even your own child, your own flesh and blood, can surprise you unpleasantly. And with Nate's child,
The genetics are unclear. Look around. Nate's not the only man in the world. There's a decent guy living next door. Why not give him a chance?
But Leslie was determined. She was deeply in love with Nate, and due to her gentle nature, felt a strong sympathy for his son. She believed that over time, affection, support, and kindness could win the heart of her future stepson.
Why didn't the parents of Nate's late wife take care of their grandson? Mrs. Gifford asked. That would have brought some comfort.
Nate's wife was also an orphan. There's no one to provide care, Leslie replied to her mother.
Mr. Gifford, Leslie's father, interjected. There's another problem. We don't know anything about this boy's heritage. I don't know how else to explain, but genes mean a lot. The boy might come from a troubled background. You'll raise him and he might end up drinking or worse. Why would you want that kind of life?
Leslie felt unpleasant to hear this, and she asked her parents, Let's not judge the child before we get to know him. It's not his fault he hasn't got a mother. It's challenging for all of us to adjust to change, and it's even harder for him as a child. So please, when he comes to meet you, refrain from interrogating him. However, Leslie needlessly worried about her future stepson's meeting with her parents. Nate attended the meeting with his bride's parents without his son, who decided to stay home. Mr. and Mrs. Gifford didn't welcome Nate warmly, but Leslie continually reassured him with her affectionate gaze and subtle touches. Mrs. Gifford directly stated her opinion to Nate when he, following the rules of good manners, asked for her daughter's hand in marriage. Nate, she said, I have nothing against you personally. You're a good-looking man. However, I worry that you're rushing into marriage. Your son seems to hold a negative view of Leslie, despite her being a lovely and kind person. I fear Tucker may never accept her, let alone love her. He could, out of his own sadness, turn her life into an endless nightmare. Does my daughter deserve that? And Leslie's father went even further and suggested that Nate should give up the idea of marrying his daughter.
One of you two should be smarter. Leslie is naive and acts from the heart without considering the consequences. You're the man, and older too, so you should be wiser. Nate, don't ruin my daughter's life. My experience tells me that this union won't last long. Tucker will cause problems, you'll be away, and Leslie will have to manage everything. If you had a daughter, would you want her to marry a single father?
Nate remained silent. To him, it seemed miraculous that Leslie had accepted his proposal, despite the inevitable problems. He acknowledged that Mr. Gifford had a point, but he wasn't willing to let go of the opportunity that had come his way. Despite the warnings and grim predictions from their family, the happy couple decided to proceed with their plans. Leslie and Nate got married, registering their union in a simple manner. They signed their names in the marriage registration book without any extravagant celebrations, outfits, or guests. Nate gently tried to convince his son.
Tucker, you understand. We have no other choice. Long-distance flights are our only option.
In August, Leslie, a young wife, moved in with her husband and his son. However, Harmony did not hurry to come to the new family. Tucker tested his stepmother's patience, hoping to triumph, but Leslie remained unyielding. Tucker's early September birthday was dismal. He didn't attend school that day due to a medical examination at the hospital. What annoyed Tucker most was not the medical visit, but that Leslie, not his father, accompanied him. The boy's mood was sour, far from celebratory, especially as he had decided not to invite his classmates. Nonetheless, Leslie suggested, Tucker, why don't I ask your class teacher to invite your friends over? We'll inform their parents, of course. It'll be fun, don't you think? I'll order your favourite pizza, fried chicken wings and make fries. Is that okay? Tucker instantly snapped at his stepmother. Are you deaf or dumb? Or both? I clearly said that I don't want to invite anyone. Stay out of my way.
After an emotional outburst, the boy felt exhausted. He shuffled along the wall, barely making it to his chair, and shouted angrily, "Close the door from outside and don't come in to see me!" In the evening, Nate entered the boy's room, wished him a happy birthday and told, "Your present is waiting for you in the kitchen, but first, wash your hands." The birthday boy's mood improved slightly. However, upon seeing that Leslie was preparing food in the kitchen, he flatly refused to sit at the table, exclaiming, "I won't even try what you've cooked with your raking hands." Sighing, Leslie started packing away the food into the refrigerator, and Nate had to order takeaway. The boy begrudgingly accepted the combined gift from his father and stepmother. He left it on the table without even checking its contents. However, when Hailey dropped by to wish him a happy birthday, Tucker immediately unwrapped her gift and even put on the t-shirt she had given him. Leslie decided not to upset her stepson further, and as if suddenly remembering that she had promised something to her parents, she left the apartment. There was a sense of surrender in her departure, but she chose not to dwell on it. She felt hurt that her attempts to connect with the boy were unsuccessful, but she felt powerless to change it. Later, when Tucker was asleep and Leslie returned to the apartment, her husband chided her. "Perhaps you shouldn't leave as soon as Tucker shows his displeasure. He'll adjust eventually." However, Leslie saw it differently. "No, Nate, I believe that pushing won't solve anything, especially today on his birthday. It should be as Tucker wishes. But what can I do if he refuses to accept that life, as harsh as it may be, continues? The doctor at the clinic said that Tucker's recovery mostly depends on him. His condition is not critical, but he requires consistent therapy and professional rehabilitation. I've noted everything the doctor said. I'll give it to you to read." The couple spent half a night trying to figure out how to help the child, studying all the information available on the internet, estimating what kind of rehabilitation they could financially afford, and reading reviews. Many methods were rejected because of the high cost. Nate commented, "Yes, it seems we can't avoid my long-haul trips. But there's no other way to make that much money. Now I'm unsure how Tucker will react." Since the tragedy, Nate had not been away for extended periods, especially with the current state of his relationship with his son and stepmother. So far, he had avoided long-distance trips, sacrificing earnings to remain nearby. He rented a van from a friend and provided various small services around the city and nearby areas. A few weeks later, Nate had a job that involved transporting items. It was November, a cold day, and the poor weather conditions were challenging. The day's drizzling rain, mixed with a dropping temperature, turned the streets into a slippery skating ring. The weather forecast predicted worsening conditions. The movers hired by the client were strangers to Nate. His usual crew could not assist him that day for various reasons. After unloading the last batch of items, the movers received their payment and quickly left. "Can you dispose of a few more bags of garbage along the way?" the customer asked casually. "I'll pay you extra, of course." Nate didn't decline. Extra money was always useful, especially since he wanted to spoil his son and young wife. Leslie, however, always seemed embarrassed and even shy when he spent money on her. The thought of his wife and son made Nate feel gloomy, even though it had been several months since their wedding. Tucker still harboured a dislike for his stepmother, which he made no effort to conceal. Leslie never complained, but Nate could see it for himself. Tucker still refused to eat the food Leslie prepared. The school meal wasn't particularly fulfilling, and despite Nate giving him money for the school buffet, Tucker's refusal to eat had led to weight loss. The boy's strength was slowly dwindling, his mobility worsening, and the question of homeschooling was being raised. A couple of his classmates supported Tucker, helping him walk to and from school, but due to the icy conditions, each journey was perilous. Nate couldn't bear the thought of his son getting injured. For now, the teacher was understanding and allowed Tucker to stay home during particularly harsh conditions, provided he studied independently and completed all his class and homework assignments. Lost in gloomy thoughts, Nate nearly forgot about the trash bags. but pulled up at the last second. He parked near a large garbage can and threw bags inside. As he moved away from the container, he noticed a slight movement from the corner of his eye. His first thought was that he had disturbed some cats. Chastising himself for his curiosity, Nate shone his phone's flashlight towards the movement. There, on some pizza boxes, fallen from the trash, was a small dog with a wagging tail. Nate said softly, "Hello, little one. Don't be scared, I won't hurt you. Why are you hiding here? Were you thrown out of your home? Or have you never had a home?" In the dim light, Nate saw the sad story of a small, vagrant dog, likely a puppy. Its fur was stained and its eyes were filled with a mix of desperate hope and fear. Seeing the creature stirred feelings of pity. "What shall I do with you now?" Nate asked himself. "You could die here for no reason at all. Do you want to come with me? Tucker could use some joy. You can spend the night in warmth and we'll see what happens next." The dog looked at Nate with disbelief, but when Nate squatted, the dog got up from its cardboard bed and timidly approached, tail wagging. Nate, who had only stepped out of his car for a moment, was already feeling the harsh chill of late fall, so he quickly picked up the small creature and carried it to the car. He didn't place the dog on the seat, unsure if it had fleas, but laid down a rag on the floor and placed the trembling creature there. "Hang in there, buddy," said Nate, who was generally not a sentimental man. "I'll turn on the heater and keep you warm." Minutes later, the car was filled with unpleasant odours. The man had to crack the window, and he started to worry about Leslie's reaction to the smelly dog. Moreover, he suspected his clothes had been soiled while carrying the dog to the car. The dog, now warm, behaved calmly and made no attempts to escape. Nate was surprised by how light the dog was, easily carrying it to the apartment. Leslie was shocked when she saw not only her husband in the hallway, but also a dirty dog with thin legs and a long snout. Her words were harsh, but her tone revealed her sympathy and willingness to help the animal. "Nate, where on earth did you find this poor thing? Ooh, it reeks. We need to give him a bath." "It's not he, it's she. I found her near the garbage cans and just had to bring her home." Leslie checked her watch and sighed. "Oh, we don't have any special dog shampoo and it's too late to go to the pet store, but I guess we can use regular shampoo to remove all the dirt." Hearing a noise in the hallway, Tucker emerged from his room. The little dog, amusingly wagging its tail, confidently approached him. The excitement made the child forget that he had decided not to speak with Leslie, and he suggested, "We should ask Miss Blount from the 6th floor. She has a dog. Maybe she can lend us some shampoo." Leslie, glad that this situation had broken the tension between her and her stepson a bit, quickly went to ask the neighbour. Meanwhile, Tucker found it difficult to crouch, but he was too engrossed with the puppy to care. He continued to pet it, ignoring the unpleasant smell and dirty fur. Nate's eyes watered when his son asked, "May we keep her? I'll take care of her and walk her myself. I'll train her so well that Chili will be the best dog." The man smiled. "Good for you. You've already thought of a name. But why Chili?" "Well, see how her fur is covered with some red sauce. Why not call her Chili? If she were a boy, we could call her Ketchup." Nate laughed and offered another funny idea. "You could also name her Pizza. She was trying to keep warm on a pizza box." While father and son deliberated on the pet's name, Leslie returned from the neighbour on the 6th floor. In her hands was not just special shampoo, but also a few cans of wet dog food and a phone number for a veterinary clinic written on a piece of paper. Bathing the animal was easier with two people, so Nate helped his son. Having remembered Tucker's past disagreements with his stepmother, the man didn't entrust her with this task. Chili patiently endured being bathed and blow-dried. She behaved humbly, showing that she would do anything to avoid being back on the streets.
Once clean, the dog was revealed to be a cute mongrel, still in her teenage years and rather funny-looking. Her lineage probably included collies. The lively dog happily ate the food provided and then curled up to sleep on an old jacket of Tucker's that had been placed in the corner of his room as a temporary bed. On his first day in the new house. On her first day in the new house, Chili, left alone, caused quite a mess before Tucker returned from school. Likely driven by hunger, the dog scavenged for food, consuming all the bread on the table and the apples, leaving crumbs scattered across the floor. Once she was full, Chili found amusement in ruining Leslie's boots and Tucker's sneakers. Tucker arrived home to a scene of chaos, including puddles and piles scattered around the apartment. Unfazed by her actions, Chili greeted Tucker with a wagging tail. However annoyed, Tucker couldn't stay mad at the adorable dog for long. He lightly scolded her, saying, "Why did you have to ruin my sneakers? Leslie's shoes would have been enough. You really thought this through, didn't you, Chili? I bet you wanted to drive that nasty intruder away." Tucker didn't clean up meticulously, leaving the damaged shoes for his new friend. However, his mood soured a bit in the kitchen. With no bread left and a freezing rain falling outside, he didn't want to brave the elements for a trip to the store. Thankfully, he found some biscuits in a cupboard, which he used to make sandwiches for himself and Chili. The grateful dog never left Tucker's side. When Tucker sat down to do his homework, the dog settled next to him, happily chewing on Leslie's boot that the boy had given to her. When Leslie returned home from work to take Chili to the vet, she tripped over her chewed-up boots. Although she was disappointed because they were brand new, she knew she could have kept them in a closed locker. The mess in the kitchen stunned Leslie. As she had to rush Chili to the vet, she quickly tied it up as best she could, instead of having her snack. She knocked and peeked into Tucker's room, deciding not to scold the dog for ruining her boots. With a deep sigh, she counted to 5, aware of the time crunch, and asked her stepson, "Can you help me put Chili's collar and leash on?" "No way! I won't give up my dog," Tucker retorted indignantly. "I won't let you take her to the shelter." Leslie sat on the floor, put the leash on the dog and began to explain. "Tucker, what shelter are you talking about? Yesterday Mrs. Blount gave me a clinic's contact to schedule a health check for Chili. I've already made the arrangements, and we have to be there in 18 minutes. You're welcome to join us. I'll call a cab." Tucker wanted to accompany Chili to the vet to hear advice on care and everything else, but he'd rather do it with his father, not his stepmother. However, his father had informed him that morning that he would be home late. "No, I'm not going," responded Tucker. "I can barely stand living in the same apartment with you, let alone sharing a cab. Just be warned, if you take Chili somewhere and leave her there, then claim she ran away, I'll find out." Leslie simply shook her head. She was aware of Tucker's contempt for her, but to suspect her of such malice. His hatred must run deep if he could imagine such a possibility. Did he think she would take revenge on a pet over ruined shoes? Choosing not to defend herself to avoid seeming pitiful, Leslie responded in as neutral a tone as she could manage. "All right, Tucker, we're leaving. If it's not too much trouble, could you call your dad and ask him to buy bread? Thank you." The boy remained silent, observing his stepmother's struggle. Chili was not fond of the leash and tried to escape its grip. It took Leslie significant effort to drag Chili into the cab. The driver, an animal lover who was content with the pet fare, praised the dog. "Wow, she's feisty, but small. But her strong character is evident," he remarked. Leslie responded with a sigh. "Indeed, she's been with us for less than 24 hours and shows no signs of shyness. Instead, she's already caused a ruckus. I'm worried about what she might do next. She's chewed up shoes today. Will she start on the furniture tomorrow?" The driver reassured her. "Don't worry, she's likely teething and will chew on anything not well hidden. I've experienced this before with our Rottweiler. He taught us to keep things tidy." The man happily shared stories about his beloved pet throughout the trip, concluding as they neared the veterinary clinic, "Having a dog is hard, especially at first, but you won't find a better friend. It's when the pet leaves forever that you realise how hard it really is." He sincerely wished the passenger luck and patience with her dog. After thanking him, Leslie paid and led her stubborn pet to the vet clinic. The vet found Chili to be quite healthy, but prescribed a course for parasite removal, followed by vaccinations. Leslie purchased everything she needed at the clinic's pharmacy, including food and dried treats for Chili to chew on instead of shoes or possessions. She also received advice on leash training from a talkative salesperson. On the way home, she tempted Chili with a treat, resulting in a pleasant walk. Unsurprisingly, the majority of Chili's care fell upon Leslie. She cleaned up after the dog and ensured it didn't chew on inappropriate items. Tucker felt a twinge of jealousy as the dog he considered his showed affection towards his stepmother. That's why he conveyed via his father that only he was allowed to feed and water the dog. Leslie was willing to accept this, as the pet had brought a more relaxed atmosphere to the apartment. The dog's antics often had Tucker laughing, and he even started eating more. Although his diet mainly consisted of sandwiches and cutlets, both favourites of the dog, his appetite improved, especially since Nate had a firm rule for his son. "You can only share food with Chili after you've eaten half of it yourself." In December, Nate received an enticing job offer from an old acquaintance. It was a long-distance trip with good pay and pre-arranged return cargo. However, he was concerned about leaving his son Tucker for an extended period for the first time since a recent tragedy. He cautiously approached his wife, saying, "Leslie, I've been offered a job with good conditions. It can earn us good money before Christmas, but I'll have to be away for a while, about 2 weeks. Leslie encouraged him. "Go, and don't worry, we'll manage." As for Tucker, he looked at his father sadly and then asked, "Daddy, can I stay with Hailey while you're away? I'll make a deal with her myself if you're too busy." Nate squinted at him and replied, "Tucker, I'm tired of burdening Hailey with our problems. She's busy enough without our requests. Although she's always ready to help, it's not fair to ask her to handle everything." Despite Tucker's attempts to dissuade him, Nate was adamant. "Tucker, you'll want to take Chili with you, won't you?" The boy nodded in response to the man's stern voice. "All the more. It's not nice to dump the care of your dog on Hailey. So, you're staying here in our apartment under Leslie's supervision. I expect you not to make things difficult for her. Behave like a reasonable adult. This discussion is over. I'm relying on you, son." Leslie bid her husband farewell, although her nerves were tingling with anxiety. She would be left alone with a child who resented her, and for a significant period of time. As she prepared things for Nate, Leslie pleaded, "Please call your son whenever you can, okay? Tucker needs your support now. And don't forget about me. At least send me something once a day. It would mean a lot." The trip was scheduled to last for 14 days, but to Nate's relief, he managed to wrap up his work 4 days earlier. Tired but satisfied, he opened the door of his apartment, choosing to surprise his son and wife with his early return. He hoped the surprise would bring them joy. Merry laughter emanated from Tucker's room, leading the man to believe that the child invited his friends. However, no stranger's clothes or shoes were in the hallway. Nate removed his shoes and jacket, then quietly approached the door, careful not to startle anyone. He saw his son and Leslie dressing up Chili in a snow maiden costume. The two were so engrossed in their activity that they didn't immediately notice they were being watched. But the dog, sensing his master's familiar scent and hearing his footsteps, quickly gave Nate away. "Hooray! Daddy's here!" Tucker shouted. With Leslie's help, he got up from the floor to hug his father. Nate hugged his son, noting with joy the positive changes in the boy's relationship with his stepmother. Tucker was no longer avoiding her, but was laughing beside her. Leslie's happy face also indicated that all was well in the house. Why didn't you warn me that you were coming early? Leslie asked playfully. We only have a squid salad and some sautéed mushrooms left. I'll go to the kitchen and whip up something quick. Tucker, do you have any suggestions? Of course. I always have ideas. How about some pasta? Chili loves it. Nate watched, bewildered, as his wife and son burst into laughter. During his absence, they seemed to have developed shared memories that he was yet to discover. When the laughter subsided, Nate asked, Pasta sounds good, but why are you laughing? Smiling, Leslie winked at her husband, patted her stepson's head and replied, Tucker will explain everything. I'll go start cooking. She tiptoed to peck her husband's beard-covered cheek. The previous days had been tough, and she was overjoyed to have her family together again. Barely had she started boiling water for the pasta when Nate, Tucker and their dog Chili walked into the kitchen. We thought we'd keep you company, Nate explained, and we can even help if needed. Leslie lovingly looked at her husband and said, You've just come from a journey. Go shower, wash away your fatigue and change your clothes. Tucker and I will manage. Sure, Tucker agreed. I can even chop an onion now without crying. Leslie got me a useful tool, so I'm practicing and getting things done. By the time Nate returned to the kitchen, freshened up and slightly relaxed, the air was already filled with delightful aromas, and Chili was crunching something in her bowl. During dinner, Nate looked at his son sitting across from him. He happily noted the positive changes in the boy's health and appearance since Chili joined their house. It seemed like only a week had passed, yet the child's cheeks were rosier and his eyes sparkled as they used to. Trying to push away melancholic memories, Nate asked, So, can anybody finally explain to me the story with chili and pasta? Tucker began to recount with occasional laughter. Leslie left some minced meat to defrost on the table, intending to use it for cutlets and pasta. We put a lid on the plate and went to physical therapy. Upon returning, we found out that Chili had eaten a whole kilogram of the minced meat. The woman explained, I wasn't upset about the wasted meat or the disrupted plans. I was worried that Chili, having eaten so much cold, greasy raw meat, would fall ill. Thankfully, I hadn't added any onions or spices to it before freezing. The dog looked at us with such innocent eyes and grunted quietly. Realizing that neither Tucker nor I were going to scold her, she immediately became her usual affectionate self, wagging her tail so hard that I was afraid it would detach. Leslie laughed as Tucker continued to share the week's events during their father's absence. Daddy, do you know how brave and smart Leslie is? She's downright cool. After Chili's vaccination, we could take her out for walks. We went out for a short time so we could get some fresh air and she could learn where to do her business. We were at the corner when a large dog came running at us out of nowhere. Leslie told this scary dog to sit. It didn't follow the command, but at least it slowed down. However, I almost panicked. I wanted to pick up Chili, but Leslie told me to stay still. She shielded me with Chili and continued to give the dog commands to sit, lie down, and stand. Luckily at this time, the dog listened. Then the dog's owner came running. He was terrified and afraid that something terrible might happen. He explained that he was walking the dog for his sick brother. The leash's cabin air broke, and he even showed it to me. He admitted he was confused and didn't know what to shout except stop. He apologized for the incident. Leslie didn't make a scene, and she even praised him because the dog responded to her commands. But Hailey, who overheard our conversation, scolded the man. She said she was scared when she saw the large dog running towards us from a distance. She even claimed she needed hair dye to cover her grey hair from the fright. The man was ashamed even more. He then tied the leash to the dog's collar and led it away from us. Can you believe it? Leslie, good for you. How did you know the dog would obey? The woman shrugged. Well, the weight categories of me and this dog were clearly unequal. I could only hope for the element of surprise. Nate looked at his son and saw that his moments of joy were quickly replaced by sadness. The complete healing of Tucker's soul was clearly still a long way off. It was as if he hadn't yet allowed himself to experience complete happiness, but he was noticeably improving. There wasn't much time left to prepare for Christmas Eve. Nate promised to refrain from long-distance trips for a while, to share in the responsibility with his son and wife. The festive mood was somewhat dampened by the memory that just a year ago Doreen was with them. But Nate tried to shake off the melancholy. They didn't go all out with their apartment decorations. Tucker asked his father to forego a Christmas tree this year, and Nate understood that the reason wasn't just about their mischievous dog. Buying the Christmas tree had been made into a real tradition by Doreen. They used to leisurely stroll around the nearby Christmas tree bazaars, selecting the most beautiful trees. Then they usually went to a cafe or pizzeria, eat, laugh, discuss their favourite trees, and only then would they go to pick up their chosen tree. Without Doreen, this process just wouldn't be the same. Tucker, upon seeing all the trees for sale, was nearly moved to tears, reminded of his mother. Nate and Leslie did their best to comfort him. A cheerful dog played a significant role in this challenging task. Without any words, the dog empathized with and encouraged the boy. It became a cherished evening tradition for Nate, Tucker and Leslie to take joint walks with Chili. One day, a man with the large dog on a leash approached them and Tucker exclaimed, "Oh, Daddy, look! It's the same dog that Leslie had stopped. It doesn't seem scary at all now. He's quite cute, like a bear cub, and I even want to pet him." Nate cautioned his son, "Tucker, I hope you remember that you should not touch unfamiliar dogs without asking permission from their owners." The boy nodded and a stranger came forward saying, "Excuse me, my brother told me about an incident involving my dog, Tyler. Apparently he knocked over a woman. We're here to apologize." Tyler must have been confused. His best friend in our old town was a dog that looked exactly like yours, so he got excited. "I'm sorry it was inconsiderate. Tyler is usually well behaved, but he must have been so bored he ran away." Tucker proposed to the man, "Maybe he could be friends with our dog Chili. She's a good, cheerful girl, but with no playmates. We also have a Bologna living on the 6th floor, but she has a difficult character. She likes to walk alone." The man responded warmly, "We can try it if your parents agree." Nate held his breath, expecting his son to clarify with indignation that Leslie wasn't his parent. However, the boy was busy watching the large dog interact with his little Chili. The dogs cautiously sniffed each other, then started playing in the fresh snow. Meanwhile, Hailey was making her way home from the bus stop. As she neared her neighbours and the stranger, she cheerfully greeted them. "Good evening, everyone. What a lovely dog you have. It doesn't bother our Chili. I was terrified last time." The man apologised again, which Hailey dismissed with a wave. "No worries. All's well that ends well. I must leave now. I need to pick up a dress for a client and rush to her for a fitting. Luckily, she doesn't live far and I can walk there." The dog's owner offered, "We can accompany you if you like. Tyler needs a good walk, and his new friend seems a bit chilly." Hailey shrugged. "I can manage on my own. It's not really appropriate to walk with strangers in the evening." The man introduced himself. "Paul Garcia, at your service." After introductions and an exchange of phone numbers between Nate and Paul for future dog walks, everyone went their separate ways. Leslie was observing all of them from her window. As an empathetic woman, she understood that Hailey had developed strong feelings for Nate. His marriage to another woman must have been a blow to Hailey's ego. Despite this, Hailey had the strength not to seek revenge for her unrequited affection. She treated both Nate and his new wife civilly, avoiding causing any trouble or scandals. Of course, Leslie knew that the neighbour was a friend of Nate's first wife and did not want to become friends with her. There was no hostility between them. However, their forced interaction had even sparked a degree of mutual respect. Leslie would have been genuinely happy for her neighbour if Hailey found her own happiness, whether with Tyler's owner or someone else. Soon, Paul started to make regular appearances in their yard. Leslie suspected that he was visiting for more than just chili. He often joined Hailey on their walks and would accompany her when she had to go somewhere urgently. One day, when Leslie was home alone, there was a knock at the door. An excited Hailey stood at the doorstep. "Just imagine. Paul asked me in detail about Tucker a week ago. I told him everything I could. It's silly to keep a boy's tragedy secret, isn't it? I thought Paul was merely curious, but today he called me. He asked about Tucker's treatment. Paul has a professor who's willing to look at Tucker's medical records. Ideally, they could be scanned and emailed, but it would be better to see Tucker in person. This can only happen after the holidays when the doctor returns from a business trip abroad. If there's a chance, we should take it, right?" Leslie seemed a bit surprised and replied, "Sorry, Hailey, I'm confused about something. Paul has Nate's phone number. They call each other about walks. Why doesn't Paul directly ask my husband?" Hailey effortlessly answered the question. Paul was afraid of causing Nate any negative emotions. He didn't want to give false reassurances in case his friend refused to see Tucker. He worried about how he would appear then, like a typical braggart. "Well, I need to get to work. Paul left this email address on a piece of paper. He suggested sending the documents and description of Tucker's treatment as soon as possible. The professor might be able to provide some preliminary recommendations." "Thank you, Hailey. Please thank Paul for me. I'll call Nate immediately and ask for his permission. If he agrees, I'll send all the necessary scans right away." Nate, desperate for any glimmer of hope, readily agreed to a remote consultation with the professor for the time being. Meanwhile, a week before the holiday, Nate had a serious conversation with his son. "Tucker, I want to discuss something with you. I thought about inviting Leslie's parents to the feast. It seems only right, since they are her family. We should establish some communication with them. Would you be okay with that?" The boy pondered briefly and then replied, "Yes, we should invite them. I would be glad, as some of my classmates have 3 grandparents, and I don't seem to have any." Nate was pleased his son agreed. To not upset the boy's serene mood, he subtly changed the subject, asking, "What do you mean by 3 grandparents?" "Well, Megan Hopkins has a mum, a dad, and a stepdad. That's how she has so many grandparents," the boy explained. When Nate told Leslie about inviting her parents, she seemed slightly taken aback. She asked, "Is Tucker sure about this? I wouldn't want to upset him. After all, this will be his first Christmas without his mother." Nate reassured her. "Don't worry, he suggested it himself, saying he wanted more relatives. I didn't realize how much he missed his grandparents." "Then great! I'll call and invite them right away," Leslie responded immediately. Nate hesitated, suggesting, "Perhaps it would be better if I called. I need to establish relationships with them as well." Leslie agreed, considering that Nate was the head of their family and the owner of the apartment where the celebration would be held. It made sense that he should extend the invitation. The call from their son-in-law stirred mixed feelings in Leslie's parents. On one hand, they were not entirely pleased with their daughter's marriage. It wasn't the kind of happiness they envisioned for Leslie. On the other hand, whenever she called, her voice was cheerful, and she seemed quite happy. Perhaps they had misjudged Nate and his son. If Nate was making an effort to bridge the gap between them, Mr. and Mrs. Gifford were willing to forego a quiet evening at home for a celebration at their daughter's new home for the sake of her happiness. By noon of the Christmas day, their anticipation had peaked, and even though they were invited for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they decided it wouldn't be inappropriate to arrive early and help set the table. After ensuring that all the presents were packed in their bags and the baked turkey was wrapped safely, Mr. Gifford and Mrs. Gifford set off to visit their daughter and her family. The initial awkwardness of their early arrival was dispelled by Chili, a dog recently trained to fetch slippers. Delighted to show off her new skill, Chili entertained the guests and broke the ice between people. Leslie's parents were the first to give Tucker his gift, a large construction set, and a traditional bag of sweets. He thanked them politely. Next, Leslie and Nate received a shared present. When Mr. Gifford noticed Chili without a gift, he guiltily gestured and said to his wife, "We forgot about the dog. Should we give her a larger piece of the turkey?" Mrs. Gifford offered to assist her daughter in the kitchen, but Leslie declined. "Mum, everything is nearly ready. Just a few final touches, and setting the treats and drinks on the table. Rest and relax, don't worry. I'll manage." Tucker proposed to the guests. "Would you like me to show you my badge collection?" Mrs. Gifford was thrilled. "Thank you, I'd love to see it. I also collected badges when I was young." Mr. Gifford also decided to join his wife and his stepson. Leaning on his trusty cane, the boy, accompanied by Chili, led the guests to his room. However, upon reaching the boy's bedside table, Mrs. Gifford stared in surprise at the picture in a frame placed there. She remained immobile, even when Mr. Gifford called her. "What's wrong, darling?" he asked worriedly. "Look for yourself. Maybe I'm imagining things," the woman replied in a subdued voice, pointing to the nightstand. The man approached, unable to suppress a surprised exclamation. "No way." Tucker was utterly perplexed. He couldn't fathom why his mother's portrait had such a profound impact on the guests. What about this picture was so surprising? Sure, his mum was beautiful and very young there, but why did Mr. Gifford utter, "No way"? The subsequent comments from the guests only deepened the boy's confusion. Mrs. Gifford mused aloud. "Leslie here is about 15 years old, but I don't remember such a picture, such clothes, or even such an environment. I don't understand anything." Mr. Gifford cautiously asked Tucker, "Has Leslie told you where this picture was taken? We had never seen this photo of our daughter before." Surprised, Tucker looked at the man and, trying to hold back tears, said, "But that's not Leslie, that's my mother, Doreen, in the picture. It was taken in the orphanage." Mr. Gifford squeezed his wife's hand as she was about to say something, interrupting her. "Excuse us, we got sidetracked. Shall we continue examining your badge collection? It's fascinating." The couple observed the badges, listening to the boy speak enthusiastically about his hobby. They admired the most vibrant and rare badges, and even asked questions, but their heavy eyes kept meeting each other's. Nate, peering into his son's room, invited everyone to eat. "Let's have lunch, and then you can return to examining Tucker's collection. Are you okay with that, son?" As Mrs. and Mr. Gifford moved towards the door, they paused by Doreen's picture again. Nate noticed this odd behaviour, but couldn't understand their reaction to his first wife's pictures. Before he could ponder further, Leslie had already gathered everyone in the living room for lunch. She quickly noticed her parents' unusual embarrassment and excitement. The more she watched them, the more she became convinced that her parents seemed to know something and did not know whether to tell it to others or not. After everyone had finished their dinner and Tucker left to collect the gifted constructor, Leslie asked her parents, "Mum, Dad, what's wrong? What impressed you so much about Tucker's room?" "It's all so strange," Mrs. Gifford said after a slight hesitation. "I'll start with the beginning. Rick and I got married when we were students, and we had a daughter, Molly. I'll blame myself forever for being a bad mother. I don't have any excuses for myself. I'll just tell it as it was. Molly cried all night because her teeth were coming in. Rick was busy with his classes, while I went to the store in a half-asleep state. Molly was sleeping so sweetly that I didn't want to take her out of the stroller. Times were simpler then, or perhaps we were not so cautious as now. Regardless, the main reason I left the stroller with Molly at the store was due to my carelessness. Back then, almost all mums did the same. When I returned 5 minutes later with milk and a loaf of bread, Molly was no longer in the stroller. I was filled with terror. She couldn't have just left on her own. Searching the stroller meticulously, I hoped to find a clue that would answer the most horrifying question of my life. I was hoping to find something that would lead me back to my daughter. But there was nothing. No note, no sign. In those days, we didn't have the convenience of cell phones. I couldn't even call Rick to ask if he had taken the child without my knowledge. We involved law enforcement and volunteers, but all our efforts were fruitless. For many long years, we searched for our missing daughter, refusing to leave our temporary housing, hoping that Molly's kidnapper would eventually reveal themselves. Then you, Leslie, were born, and we continued searching for our missing daughter, but unsuccessfully. We knew the rumours about the lost elder sister would impact you as you grew up. That was the sole reason we relocated. I had almost resigned myself to never knowing what happened to our little girl. But the picture on the nightstand in Tucker's room has left me almost certain that our lost Molly is Doreen. It seems she lived right near us, and we may have even crossed paths unknowingly. It's heartbreaking that due to someone's cruel intent, Molly ended up in an orphanage. As Nate and Leslie attentively listened, they found it difficult to believe the startling news that the evening had brought them. It was indeed challenging to process such information. Leslie was the first to regain her composure. I can't believe that Tucker's mother is my sister. What a peculiar twist of fate. I am Tucker's maternal aunt. Wow! Nate now understood why he had noticed a resemblance between Leslie and Doreen. After all, they most likely were relatives. Although Leslie was much younger, certain shared features had hinted at their family connection. Tucker, seeking his father's help with a construction set, unintentionally heard about his relationship with Leslie. Surprised, he asked, "So, Mr. and Mrs. Gifford are my real grandparents?" Mrs. Gifford, tearful, rushed to embrace her only grandson. Moments later, Mr. Gifford joined them. The scene was incredibly touching, and Leslie began to wipe away her own tears. She had feared that she would always be a stranger to her stepson, and now, it turns out, he was very likely her nephew. All evening, Nate and Tucker were fondly remembering what a wonderful wife and mother Doreen had been. When, the next day, Hailey arrived to wish them all Merry Christmas, she seemed to be shocked upon hearing the full story from Leslie. "Initially, I thought you were a swindler," she said. "I even warned Nate and Tucker to be wary of you. But over time, my opinion of you significantly improved. I sometimes felt guilty for betraying Doreen's memory in this way, but I couldn't help it." Leslie embraced Hailey and said, "Thank you for everything you did, for my sister and her son." From that day, Leslie's parents began visiting her family more frequently. Nate, initially wary of them, became more comfortable. He went to work with peace of mind, knowing everything would be okay at home. The professor, where Leslie took Tucker for a checkup, examined the boy and scheduled additional tests. He reassured Leslie, saying, "I can't make any guarantees, but the human capacity for recovery can be astounding. Let's hope the treatment helps." Both Mr. and Mrs. Gifford treated Tucker with great care. Unnoticed by others, Tucker began to call them grandfather and grandmother. They took turns with Leslie in taking the child to medical centres, cultural sites and amusement parks. Tucker was overjoyed to have such wonderful grandparents and proudly introduced them to his friends. On the anniversary of Tucker's mother's death, they all visited the cemetery together. Leslie, spending some time at the grave, expressed her gratitude and sought forgiveness. "Thank you, sister. Tucker is a wonderful child whom I love dearly. I love Nate too. I feel ashamed to be so happy. I regret not knowing you sooner, but I promise I'll do everything possible to make your men happy." Family get-togethers became a mandatory tradition that alternated weekends at Leslie's parents' house or Nate's apartment. During a summer family picnic organised by Nate, Tucker unveiled the results of his treatment. He carefully leaned his cane onto the table and took a few tentative steps, followed by more. The adults rushed to embrace him, showering him with words and kisses. Chili watched the joyful scene, realising that something wonderful was happening, perhaps even better than a bowl of special canned dog food. The man who saved her from certain death, the kind woman who often took her for walks, and her best friend, the wonderful boy who could now walk without a stick, all deserved her joy. Then Tucker and Chili ran across the field, as if playing catch-up, and the adults watched them, marvelling at the incredible intertwining of their fates. When Hailey and Paul, with formidable-looking but good-natured Tyler, joined the happy family, they invited everyone to their wedding. And then Hailey gave Chili a toy, saying, "If it wasn't for you, I probably never would have found my happiness."